So welcome to what companies need to know about data privacy and compliance. Today I have two of our partners at DBL with us ready to talk to you about that. Aaron Jackson, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do it. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us today. And if you're watching this later, thanks for tuning in. My name is Aaron Jackson. I'm a partner at Dunlap Bennett and Ludwig. I focus my practice in the government and regulatory space, as well as the cyber and litigation space. I primarily support companies that are interfacing with the federal government, mostly in the national defense and national security industries, but I do branch away from that as well. So I do a lot in cyber, government contracts, international trade and export control laws, and it's really fun working with companies. So I'm happy to be here today.
Thanks, Aaron. Craig, would you also like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Craig Besnoy. I'm a partner at DBL. I focus on cybersecurity, data monetization, and protection. I help businesses of all sizes enable their data to be protected and monetized in a way that creates longevity for the company, creates a larger asset, and brings value to the organization.
So I see we've got some people with a lot of experience in cybersecurity here today. Could you tell us a little bit about what are the top cybersecurity threats this year?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take this one if you don't mind, Craig. So just to give you a general overview, and I think it's the theme that you're going to hear from me is the same theme that we've probably been reiterating over and over again, which is cybersecurity is a big deal. And it's only becoming more and more of a big deal. Think about it this way. From the last several years alone, we've seen about a 72% increase in overall data breaches. Now, the previous record was 2021. And so we've beat that record in the last several years by over 70%. So that gives you an idea of kind of the rise in cyber crime and cyber related concerns. And when you think about the impact, the overall data breach impact across the world is over $4.8 million for businesses with their facing data breaches. In the United States, it's closer to $10 million. So this is a really big problem that the world and the United States is facing right now that we need to take really seriously. Business email compromises are totaling about $3 billion in overall losses. And that was just in 2023 alone. The data for 24 isn't in, but what we're seeing is it's getting even worse. And when we think about impact to businesses, 94% of businesses right now are experiencing compromises and incidents across the business. And so this is not something that's just with a few individuals that happen to get unlucky on a given day. This is something that is becoming a massive problem. When the researchers look at all of the statistics, they're estimating an overall loss or impact of greater than $10 trillion by 2025. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the problems that we're facing. We're seeing a rise kind of across the board, whether it's malware the last couple of years, 72% rise, ransomware, where criminals are capturing data and holding it for ransom until you pay a particular amount. That's increased over the past several years by about 74%. Distributed denial of services, where lots of attacks at a single time to cripple a company, that's increasing approximately about 20% over the past year. Internet of Things is becoming a really big problem. We're talking about a 400% increase on attacks for the Internet of Things. And when I say that, IoT, I'm really thinking about all of those things that are just connected in some way, in a meaningful way, to the internet. So smart devices, wearables, all the way down to my refrigerator. All of those are susceptible to attack, and we're seeing massive rise there. And then the other one is that's really big is supply chain attacks. We're talking about a $60 billion global impact just to supply chains in the last several years on an annual basis. So again, problems across the board. Now is not the time to go lax on cybersecurity. It almost sounds like we're a broken record, but every year it seems as though the records are breaking themselves. So that's kind of a general look at it. I know we wanted to talk specifically about two big ones that we're seeing our clients facing right now, kind of beginning with this idea of third-party vendor attacks. And I'll pass it over to Craig for that.
Thanks, Aaron. Well, indeed, supply chain attacks are now the preferred method that are used by threat actors. Almost 62% of network intrusions originate with a third party. Often, it's somebody in the company's supply chain. According to a study by KPMG, 73% of organizations have experienced at least one significant disruption from a third-party cyber incident in the last 3 years. And recent cyber incidents that you may have heard that were caused by a vendor was this past year, the United Health Group subsidiary Change Healthcare. There was a significant cyber breach that took down the entire healthcare system, crippled any type of billing, insurance billing, and it was all not from United Healthcare, but from one of their vendors and their subsidiaries. And in November of 2023, a subsidiary of Infosys, they provided outsourcing services for financial institutions. They had a security incident that breached millions of individuals, including two of their major clients, Bank of America and Fidelity. So these types of threats don't stop at your door, but really extend to all of your vendors. And there's a couple of different ways that you should look at to be able to safeguard this. I think the first starts with in the contracting part. As you're contracting with a vendor, you need to make sure that they have an agreement to implement strong cybersecurity and that your expectations of what they need to meet, they've contractually obligated to meet them. Those standards that you have imparted onto you by either government or other types of regulatory authorities need to be pushed down to your vendors so that they have the same data handling, incidents reporting that you have. But most importantly, I think that you need to also try to get the right to audit these provisions, the right to be able to go in if you suspect that they are in violation of the cybersecurity requirements that you require, that you have the ability to go in and audit them. Another thing is access control. A lot of times, once we let a vendor in the door to start working with us, they have unlimited access to your data systems. So implement least privilege, granting access to vendors only for the resources that they absolutely need. And regularly update those. So at least once a year, you need to look at what access to what data that vendors have and to scale back that data access if it's necessary. You need to continuously monitor these because vendors' scope of what the vendors need is always changing. Make sure that the data that a vendor sends to you and that you send to a vendor is encrypted. Make sure that they have an incident response plan so that if they have a breach, that you are part of that incident response plan, that they have to inform you in a timely manner. And finally, make sure that your vendor has an security training. As part of onboarding a vendor, many times you go through and talk about the way that a vendor interacts with your accounts payable department, how they submit their bills, how they submit their timesheets. It's also good to make sure that they take a cybersecurity training that is authorized and endorsed by your head of cybersecurity. Aaron?
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about if we've got time towards the end of our conversation. I think we're going to hit again the ideas and concerns associated with third-party affiliations and third-party attacks. But the other thing that I thought we could spend just a little bit of time mulling over, you and I, is the infusion of artificial intelligence into the business sector. This is obviously huge. I mean, 83% of businesses right now identify AI as their top business priority. It's an area that is growing by over a third every year. They estimate by 2030 the industry is going to be valued somewhere around $1.8 trillion. And so this is a huge deal for businesses and individuals right now, and how AI plays into cybersecurity and data privacy. Definitely worth a couple of minutes kind of thinking about. What do you think?
Yes, I think it's super important. First, AI is a very important asset to be able to use to companies to be able to increase efficiencies of your operations. But those rules with how people actually execute and use AI within your organization is super important. I think the most important thing is to remember AI is a collective brain. It's a collection of all information that's put in there. It's stored and it's used again to be able to generate new information and requests. So the most important thing I think at the top of your list is don't put anything confidential into any of your queries that you're doing on AI. All the confidential information, any trade secrets that you have, any customer information, any vendor information needs to be kept out of your AI queries, which is probably the most important thing that you need to do when you're implementing that policy in your organization.
Yeah, I was thinking also from the sense of, we'd love AI to be used just for wonderful purposes, but people are people, and things happen, and so we've seen a lot of sophistication and use of AI in more elaborate and sophisticated ways of executing cyber attacks. And so, as great as AI is, and a wonderful capability and future potential that it has, it's also being used for negative purposes, which kind of plays into the fact that AI is also used to better prevent and deter and protect against. But it's this competing interest of technology, and it's almost like who's got a race to have the more sophisticated model. So it's just increasing all the more the need to be vigilant with your cybersecurity controls.
Yeah, the awareness on it's really important, and that awareness that cybersecurity, that AI can be used to create cyber breaches, should be a part of your employee training and awareness. Because if they know that AI may have generated this question, this email, that they can go ahead and raise their level of suspicion and to be, less trustworthy of some of these queries that are coming into them.
Yeah, I work a lot with clients in that engage with the Department of Defense. I was former Department of Defense for 20 years myself, so it's fun to see what the DoD is doing when it comes to AI. This year, they put out their DoD vision for artificial intelligence, and without getting into all of the intricacies of it, let's just say that they are very actively looking at what the future, not only kind of combat landscape will look like, but what the future kind of global landscape will look like, and those things that we need to be doing to get ahead of it and stay leaders in this industry. That definitely an interesting time to be alive in the technical world. The use of AI is really going to completely revolutionize the way that we do business and engage with one another on a daily basis. So it's an exciting time for tech, that's for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think what it's going to wind up doing is going to really change the relevant laws that we see coming up in that we saw in 2024 and the future laws of 2025. I think that really one of the big things that we're going to see is creating more resistance to risk management, the ability to be able to emphasize a risk-based approach to information security. That they'll be able to identify potential cybersecurity risks, and then be able to, how do you manipulate those risks to be able to mitigate the impact that they have on the firm or the company. Monitoring and updating that risk is super important. And then one of the things that they have is that communication to others that you work with, communication to outside agencies if a breach happens. Because one of the best ways to mitigate risk and to mitigate a breach is to communicate that the breach incident actually occurred. And that allows everybody to take action, to be able to shut down their computers if they need, to unplug, and to be able to really activate the IT team.
Yeah, it seems like regulators were slow to get on board with trying to get ahead of AI, and it definitely seems like the momentum is building. And so we'll definitely want to be keeping an eye on the horizon as we continue to gain progressive momentum towards getting ahead of how to regulate and control the use of AI. It's a fascinating topic. We could probably go for several hours on this topic, but I think we need to move on.
The next webinar we'll put down for that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
So
I think
could I ask? Oh, sorry,
Go ahead,
Craig.
Go ahead. Karen.
I wanted to ask you too what the most relevant federal laws this year are in terms of cybersecurity.
Well, I think that one of the things that really came out this year, and a memo that really came out from the White House, was the adoption of a zero trust architecture strategy. And that trust architecture strategy represents a significant shift from a perimeter-based security model to a model that focuses on protecting resources regardless of the network location. So the perimeter-based security that has been in the past is, you draw a moat around your infrastructure, and then once you're inside that infrastructure, you're allowed to access. You're never checked again on your security once you pass that perimeter, that moat. But what happens on a zero trust architecture, it's a never trust, always verify principle. So it assumes that every user and device, even if they're within and past that first trustworthy test, even if they're within that moat, by default, they need to go ahead and verify every time they ask or request for new information. So once you're inside that network, if you go and try to access a new data file, you may be asked again for a second time to validate your password or a multi-factor authentication. If you go to write something new to a database that you haven't accessed before, you're going to be able to have a second factor authentication to make sure that just because you're inside the network doesn't mean that you're going to continue to have access on it. And it's kind of really a couple of different areas that it's really based on. One is the identity of the individual, and they use this kind of enterprise managed identities to be able to implement multi-factor authentication, to be able to be phishing resistant. The idea about the devices. So they record what devices have access. Is this a new device that's coming in that I haven't seen before? If it's a new device, they're going to be looking at different ways to access it, or to be able to verify it on a new device. The different types of networks that people ask to be able to join. The different types of applications and workloads. So if you go into a new application, and the different types of data. So what kind of data are you writing to or reading from? These 5 areas will constantly be monitored and constantly be asked for new and additional information, because it's really about that infrastructure. And that's what we're really seeing the federal government kind of coming in on, is the different types of infrastructure security that we can establish. This zero trust architecture is something that they're putting out, but what we're also seeing is that the Department of Defense has come up with a new certification model. And Aaron, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So CMMC 2.0, big deal. It came out just last week, October 15th, it was finally released. Now, if you do any work with the Department of Defense, as a contractor or a subcontractor, you are absolutely going to want to know about this. This is one of those that has been a very long time coming, and it's finally here. It is in print, and it is now official as of last week. So I wanted to spend just a little bit of time for our companies interested or actively engaged with Department of Defense business opportunities to talk a little bit about that. So CMMC 2.0, what's it really all about? Well, the bottom line is, just like based off of the statistics that I was talking about earlier, and the reality that we are seeing a lot more cyber espionage, both on the business and unfortunately at the state level, they have seen for some time now that we need to ensure a more robust cybersecurity platform for individuals doing business with the Department of Defense. The existing model, the CMMC 1.0, just did not quite cut the security protocols that needed to be in place to make sure that we were efficiently and adequately sharing, but also protecting information in exchanges with the Department of Defense. And so they implemented CMMC 2.0, which adopted kind of like what Craig was talking about earlier, a slightly different approach, but it's a trust but verify approach. And with CMMC 1.0, there was 5 different levels. Each level had to provide a certain amount of assurances that they were accomplishing security protocol objectives. Those levels have been condensed to 3, but importantly for companies, what CMMC 2.0 does is provide more outside certification requirements. In other words, they can't just self-certify that they're meeting the requirements anymore. They have to go outside and get that outside certification by what they call a C3 PAO. That's a CMMC cybersecurity protective. Oh gosh, I forgot. Assessor, or excuse me, party assessor organization. So C3 PAO. There are lots of companies that are out there that are offering those services right now, but it is a fairly extensive assessment process. And so you need to get ahead of it. So those 3 new levels, like I said, it used to be 5, they've condensed them to 3. Level 1 is if you are engaged in business that just shares federal contract information, FCI. That's a level 1, your lowest level of review necessary. You essentially have to conduct an individual self-assessment with 15 kind of standard requirements. And you can self-assess that on an annual basis, certify that through the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation process, and you should be fine if you are that level 1. However, if you have gone up to level 2, and if you are sharing either CUI or classified information or somehow holding or working with that level of sensitive information, you are at the level 2. And it's there that we start seeing the need for that C3 PAO involvement. You still have to comply with the NIST 171 requirements, which is essentially 110 controls or requirements that you have to satisfy, but we're no longer self-certifying. I will note that there are some opportunities that business may have to self-certify and not seek that outside assessment, but I'm going to just kind of head that off at the pass and say that's likely going to be very limited in the near future to only those that very clearly are not dealing with national security interests. If there's any connection with national security controlled information, they're going to require that outside assessment. And again, very robust process that you're going to have to get ahead of. It's going to take you probably 4 to 6 months to complete that process. Once you're done, it's an every 3-year requirement. So a 3-year outside, kind of triennial outside assessment and an annual certification that you are still in conformance with the controls as was previously assessed. If you're in that level 3, you're dealing with very highly sensitive information. So not only is there that C3 PAO process, outside assessment, but the DoD is also going to come in through their DIBCAC process. That stands for Defense Industrial Based Cybersecurity Assessment Center. They're going to come out, not only make sure that you've conducted your individual assessment, your C3 PAO assessment, but they're also going to conduct a third internal DoD-based assessment looking at, in addition to everything else, 24 other controls on top of that. So that also is going to be triennial with a 1-year or annual certification along the way. But lots of exciting movement. CMMC 2.0 is now here, effective as of 16 December. And we're going to start seeing the Department of Defense writing them into the contracts as early as the first quarter of 2025. with full implementation to be phased out over 4 phases over the next several years, right? So it's not just that you have to be compliant immediately as of Q1 2025, but it is you need to start getting your ducks in a row. You need to start figuring out who that C3PAO is. Do we need some outside audits going into that to make sure that we're postured well to be successful during that assessment process? And you need to start getting on board to that. It's no longer ethereal or theoretical. We now have it on paper, and it's time to start implementing this new program.
Yeah, and I think that it sounds a little overwhelming, but one of the things that I think that we've proven at DBL is that we have the capability to be able to be consultative with our clients, handhold them through this process, and to be able to make sure that they're prepared for that audit by that outside agency.
Yeah, and I can already anticipate, as I'm sure you can too, Craig, that there will be lots of bumps along the way as they're continuing to try to make this a smooth process. I don't think something as complicated as this is going to be very smooth. And I can see in the future a lot of contested issues based off of assessments and assessment reports and assessment reviews. And so there's going to be a need to get your legal team involved early and continuously throughout this process in the event that that bump does happen, or the outside assessor or the Department of Defense decides that their assessment of your company is one way where you've demonstrated something quite to the contrary. Needless to say, lots of very, very large dollar defense contracts are at play here. And so the need to get it right, both for the government and the company, is really paramount.
Yeah, preparation is really the thing to do and to get ahead of it. And so reach out. I really encourage anybody to reach out to Aaron if they think they may need any assistance or just want to talk about it, because it can be really confusing.
Yeah. Thanks, Craig.
So now that we know what's going on the federal level quite comprehensively, thank you guys. What do companies need to know about on the state level in terms of regulations for data privacy or cybersecurity?
Yeah, thanks, Kara. I'll go ahead and take this one kind of up front and just talk general about kind of the state legislation that's out there right now. And as would be expected, we're already like 30 minutes into this, and we've only hit a couple of questions. That tends to happen when you've got some cyber geeks on the same webinar talking about this kind of stuff. So I'll try to speed this one up just a little bit. From a general perspective, just think of it this way. States have somewhat been slow to get on board with a privacy bandwagon. The reality is, however, that the federal government has also been slow, and the legislation that they have been willing to put out there is very narrow to a particular industry or area, which has really pushed states to start taking a more proactive role. So we're starting to see a lot of movement. In fact, 2023 alone was really a banner year for state legislation when it comes to data privacy. Most of these laws, just think of it this way, it's a lot of it is consumer. I would say most of it is really consumer based. And the reality that citizens of states have the right to have information protected. Everything that you put out there isn't just readily available to be shared with whoever companies or the government feel appropriate to share it with. You have the right to defend your privacy and personal information. And so a lot of this legislation is really based on defining the appropriate parameters for where consumers have rights and ensuring that the businesses are executing those and implementing policies that ensure that those rights are in place. So roughly 20 states or so far have enacted or are in the process of implementing those final stages of comprehensive privacy right protections that are out there. But I would say California has really led the way when it comes to what this looks like, and a couple of other key states. So without getting into too much more details, Craig, I'm going to pass it over to you to talk specifically about some of these states.
Yeah, I think that that consumer data that's protected, really, like you said, California really forged ahead and created the model that, because states like Virginia, Colorado, New York followed suit. It really comes, but one thing that kind of binds them all together is that that they want to protect five main pieces of information: the protected consumer information, that's like what kinds of transactions you're doing; the financial information, your credit card information, your bank account, or any kind of passwords that can access that; your health information that's been done both at the federal level with HIPAA and as at the state level. Your online data activity. So the idea, that's why you have these privacy policies with all these different cookies, which monitors how much of your online data activity they can track, and these types of other sensitive personal information, which might lead to race, ethnicity, religious beliefs, sexual orientation, or what's coming on is really that biometric data. Your idea when you're using, looking at your phone and being able to unlock your phone with your face, or being able to use your thumbprint for stuff. Either any of those types of data is being protected, and is being protected under these state information, these state regulations that are happening right now. But once those things are protected, then what the key for businesses is that you protect it, but it doesn't mean that you can't collect it. It doesn't mean that you can't use it. It means that you need to have transparency when you're collecting it and when you're using it. Because many times that information allows you to perform better as a business. If you know their past purchase history, you can make suggestions. If you know their geographic location or their IP address or their browsing history, you can then make other suggestions on locations or things that can help enhance that consumer experience. So the key piece is that you want to make sure when you're collecting data isn't not to collect data, but to use a couple of principles. One is to use transparency. Communicate to your consumer what you're collecting, how you're collecting it, why you're storing it, who's accessing it, and why you're using it. Make sure that if you do collect that information, and you know what to do if you have an incident. So if that data and information is breached, there's certain laws and regulations that you have to report that as a breach, and to be able to eradicate the breach, to be able to recover that breach. So the type of training on what to do if bad things happen is super important. Having data, the other thing is that if you have data that you're not using anymore and you have no need for it, you need to get rid of it, because keeping that data in even in a secure manner increases your exposure. And finally, remember, even though you've collected this data, you've told them why you're collecting it, you're handling it in a responsible manner, the consumers still have rights. They have rights to access what data you have about them. They have the right to correct inaccuracies in that data. They have the right to delete their personal data. They have rights to opt out of certain data processing activities that they don't think is necessary to benefit them in your consumer business relationship. So these are being done at the federal level. It's being done at the state level with laws like the California Privacy Rights Act or the Virginia Consumer Data Protection Act. And we're going to see more and more states enacting this until we wind up getting something at an overarching federal level.
Yeah. One thing that you said, I'll just foot stomp really quick, Craig, and then I have a question I wanted to ask you while we're on this topic. You had mentioned the need to ensure that individuals within your companies understand the reporting requirements for the different states. And I just want to foot stomp that. That is a very complicated process. Every state kind of has different reporting requirements. There is kind of a model that's out there that a lot of states have adopted, but you'll find that there are a lot of nuances to the reporting requirements in the event that you have data that has been compromised down to the individual level. And so in the event of a data breach, you really need to know that stuff, and just emphasizes the importance of getting your attorneys on board as soon as possible for those things. I think we might talk a little bit more about that in the here in a little bit, but I just wanted to foot stomp that because that is so important. And we've specifically seen so much of that as we've supported clients in that area. But the other thing that I was going to ask you real quick was, we've talked about federal requirements, we've talked about state requirements, and you're really an expert when it comes to this interplay in this area. Do you see a lot of overlap between state requirements and federal? At what point in time does it transition to more of a federal issue? What is the interplay between the state and the federal government when it comes to these things?
Well, most of the privacy of the consumer information is based on commerce. So the idea around states being able to control the commerce, around the federal government being able to control commerce with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act or the Federal Trade Commission have done that type of play. But really what we're seeing is some of that infrastructure regulation that the federal government has put down, whether it's NIST, whether it's high trust, these type, the ISO 27001, these are all infrastructure guidelines that allow the states to hang their hat on something to support privacy. So the states say, hey, you need to protect the consumer information, but how do you do it? You look to the federal government, who've been able to create these broad federal based regulations that govern the infrastructure of a cybersecurity system that allows us to be able to comply with these state regulations. And I think that that's how they play together.
Yeah.
So are there any foreign data privacy and cybersecurity laws that will impact American companies, or is it more just state and federal together?
Yeah, no, I mean, depending on the company, I think there's a lot of impact that you can see from a foreign standpoint. So we've talked about federal requirements, we've talked about state requirements. So it would make sense that we talk a little bit about federal requirements that are out there. And I would say, you know, the movement that we've seen at the state level recently kind of mimics or mirrors the movement that we've seen from a country-based standpoint as well. A little bit slow to get going, but we're seeing lots and lots of movement now, primarily with the more technologically advanced and kind of first world countries. We've seen a little bit of sluggish movement with some of the lower economically disadvantaged countries that are out there. But in all, about 80% of the countries worldwide have adopted some form of data privacy legislation. About 137 countries, I think it is at this point in time, either have them in place or they are working to get them finalized at this time. And so we've seen a lot of really good movement in this particular area, a lot of leadership internationally, not only from the United States, but from Europe with the GDPR. And I'm hoping that Craig can talk about that in just a second. But we've seen a lot of good movement with Brazil and India and Japan and Australia and Canada, just to name a few. Those countries have really emerged as leaders in this area. Craig, did you want to talk specifically about Europe just for a bit?
Yeah, you know, the GDPR, you know, was really the leader out there and really emphasized the need to have consumer protection, mostly because privacy in Europe is a human right. You know, you're born with that right. And like I said, in the US, it's more of a consumer based right. But one of the things that I've dealt with a lot of companies, especially small and medium sized businesses, is they wonder, you know, do I need to comply with GDPR? So there's a couple of checklists that we can provide, and you know, afterwards, if you email us, we can go ahead and give you a GDPR checklist to be able to see. But you know, looking at how your data processing activities are done, do you offer goods or services to individuals in the EU, or do you process individual information? What kind of data do you collect? Do you collect personal information? Do you collect information from minors? Physical presence in the EU is another thing that can really generate and trigger the need to be able to comply with GDPR. A lot about how you process data. So is the volume and frequency of data that you bring in from the EU, do you process that data once it's here? Do you engage in some kind of large scale or monitor EU residents? So, you know, if you're a small or medium sized business and you have an e-commerce business, how much of these folks from Europe are buying your products? And then once they buy your products, do you continue to monitor them? Do you continue to send them emails? and also, do you transfer data? So a lot of times, some of my clients have businesses in the US as well as in Europe, and they want to communicate back and forth to look at trends. Maybe there's a buying trend or a product that's being offered in the EU that they want to bring in the US. If any of these types of interactions with EU residents are triggering for you, and it's something that you do, it's most likely that you need to comply with GDPR. Complying with GDPR is a complex issue, and it's something that us at DBL have the ability to go and help you and handhold you through that entire process.
Yeah, it really does feel like Europe has been a big leader in this area with GDPR. I think the US is unfortunately just kind of behind the times, so to speak, but that's given Europe an opportunity to really kind of set a platform out that we can kind of look to and figure out how we might want to move along with them, or perhaps slightly different than what they're doing. But the other thing that I was going to mention is another country that's demonstrated leadership in this area. I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but China, through their personal information protection laws, their PIPLs, have also demonstrated a certain level of leadership. The only thing that I was going to mention with them is if you are a country doing business with China involving personal information of any type, then you need to be very mindful of the regulatory body that's surrounding that. I think some of the feedback that I've seen and experienced in doing this work with companies engaged in China is that the overall impact, the overall feeling is it is very heavily regulated, particularly when it comes to cross-border data sharing, right? They want to keep everything kind of internal to China, and any attempts to do any sort of cross-border transaction or cross-border information sharing goes under some very heavy scrutiny. There is a lot of oversight with China as well, as you could imagine. And unfortunately, the other thing is a lot of the PIPL is really ambiguous. It's open to interpretation, and the Chinese government is slow to give that interpretation. And so it feels like you're kind of operating a little bit in the Wild West. You know generally what to do, but you don't know the precise things that are going to satisfy the government officials reviewing those transactions on the outside. So it's just something you need to be mindful of when doing business in China.
Yeah, especially when you're doing manufacturing, especially if you're using new techniques to manufacture, and especially if you're using any of that technology that might be of the manufacturing to do it in an efficient way that might be origin of that information might be Chinese. That's something you really need to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of it segues a little bit, or at least dovetails into kind of export controls. All of it in a way kind of shares the same pattern. There's just a lot of scrutiny on the type of exports that we're doing with China right now. We need to be very mindful of that. And the same thing goes to data privacy and how they are mindful with information sharing. So definitely things to be mindful of if you're doing business with China.
So it seems like governments, not necessarily all around the world, but pretty much in general, state governments, federal, American governments, they all seem to be a little bit slow on cyber given the massive rise in these threats that we're seeing. I also know that companies are also a little slow. Why are they slow getting on board with cybersecurity, and why would it be good business sense for them to kind of tighten up that side of their business?
Well, I'll tell you that one, Aaron. So I'll start off. I think that the reason is that traditionally businesses have said, and employees within that business and even CEOs within that business have said, that's not my problem. That's IT's problem. And they say, they hand it over to their trusted IT department and say, I'm going to let them take care of it, and I don't have to worry about it. It's one last thing off my to-do list, But what really it is that the IT department and the infrastructure security that we've talked about thus far can only go so far. And the biggest threat to a cyber incident isn't the third-party vendors, isn't the fault in the infrastructure. It's us as individuals. And us individuals clicking on an email that has been sent. Maybe it's from AI, maybe it's from a foreign national that's trying to infiltrate our system, but that's the biggest threat that we have. And the idea about us getting together and thinking about cybersecurity first is a super important way. Aaron, what do you think about that?
Yeah. I think two things actually. Just going back to what you said a second ago and the statistics that we talked about right at the very beginning. I've seen a lot of CEOs. In fact, I've had these conversations with CEOs that have taken the mindset of, well, I'll worry about it when it happens to me. It's very reactive. And luckily, we're starting to see a lot of really positive movement away from that because the statistics bear out that we're beyond it's not about, if, but when, sort of thing. You've probably already been breached and you might not even know it. Those types of things. 94% of companies are already experiencing this. And we see the trend lines just exponentially rising. So we're kind of beyond the point of, if when it happens, sort of things. And we're really seeing companies starting to get on the bandwagon just because it is so prevalent and the cost is just too risky to just take a responsive posture. So I think that is helpful. I would say the other reason why it makes really good business sense, like Kara had asked also, is it's the law in many different areas. So if you are in particular industries, you are obligated, you are bound to adhere to those requirements. If you're in the healthcare industry, obviously HIPAA applies. If you're in the financial industry, we're talking about GLBA. We've already talked about the CCPA and some of the state-based requirements that are out there and the trend of states going in a more comprehensive fashion here. And the GDPR. If you're doing international work, we're seeing the rise in requirements at an international level. And so we're just beyond the point of needing to just be reactionary. And it really is time, if the company isn't already making this a massive priority, they're behind the power curve, even with other businesses that are trending in that direction.
Yeah, and I think it's also because the consumers are making it a priority, and the consumers have a choice. So if a consumer wants to choose between a business that has cybersecurity and maybe has gotten a certification or their employees have certifications, that's something to tout, that's something to promote, that's something to market, and unfortunately those businesses that wind up having a cyber breach have severe damage to their reputation, and it continues to plague them over and over with bad reviews or bad internet. So consumers trust their businesses to be able to make sure that their information is secure. And if they can't get comfortable that you're going to be secure, they're going to choose another business. And I think that
No, sorry. Go ahead. Finish what you were saying.
No, I think that's really comes down to companies instilling within their employees and within their business a good cyber mindset. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to just emphasize what you just said because I thought it was really good. The other, thought calculus that goes into it from a leadership standpoint, from a business standpoint, is I think leaders in the past have seen that, if it happens, it's survivable. Well, I mean, we'll get through it. And I think the risk has just increased in a lot of ways, just for the reasons that you talked about. Consumers talk. And there's more transparency and discussions between consumers that are out there and readily available for everybody. So big time hacks and data breaches and things like that become far more risky because it's more difficult for the company to survive the reputational hit that it's going to take if something big like that occurs. So I think it's a wonderful thing to think about as we're trying to figure out where, in terms of priority, cybersecurity falls for companies.
Yeah.
So what are some of the best practices for data privacy or creating this cyber mindset?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Craig. I think we've already talked about it quite a bit, but it really is just what you said, Kara. It's adopting the mindset. It's stepping into a new way of thinking where this is not something that you talk about, at the quarterly, board meeting or something along those lines, but it's something that you're talking about on a day-to-day basis in terms of implementing policies and procedures to make sure that that at all times the company is protected from this rise in cybersecurity attacks and data breaches. So I think that mindset is incredibly important. The big things that I think you would throw into that mindset is the need to, just like what Craig was talking about earlier, the need to control access to data, the need to limit the amount of time that you are holding individuals' collected data is also a really big deal. I can attest to times in the past where I have seen companies, I've seen the government from my time in the Department of Defense. We just hold on to information. It goes into a file and it never leaves. And so the need to refresh and purge that data that's no longer necessary is really important. And putting that into your refresh policies, I think, is really important. Encryption is becoming a really big deal. The need to encrypt sensitive data, having strong authentication requirements. And I'm seeing a huge rise in that, both in the governmental side, also in businesses, really getting into authentication. So that is a trend that I would highly encourage companies to step into if they haven't already done it. Training would be another huge thing. And that's something that, Craig, you're exceptionally good at. I love doing this as well. That is training and exercising our policies and programs that companies put in place for cybersecurity and to protect against data breaches.
I think you're right. That training is super important, because what you're training them is on all the things that you've said and you've listed out, but you're training them that it's my responsibility as a member of this firm to do these things. It's not something that's pushed on other people. So training them on it's your responsibility and specifically what you're supposed to do as a member of this organization to make sure that we're all secure is really the key part on that training, I think.
Yeah, I think it goes right back to what Kara said. That's really what adopting a cyber mindset looks like, is that everybody plays a role, and it's a day-to-day role that you're playing. It's just a part of what we do as a business moving forward. Yeah, and so doing those exercises and trainings really help prepare the company in the event of some sort of attack or breach. It instills that mindset with employees, and then just continuing to do those risk assessments and those audits. Building that into your company's practice as well is just really important. All of that will lead to a healthier organization.
So could I ask you real quick, what are the consequences of these data breaches that we've been talking about?
Oh, gosh. We've already talked about it a little bit, Craig. I can kind of pick up on that just a little bit.
Okay.
But again, this is an industry that is valued by 2025. It's valued at the 10 trillion, I would say it's a $10 trillion industry, but I'm not going to call I refuse to call cybercrime an industry, but the impact is in the double digit trillions. And when we look at the businesses that are affected and the amount that each individual business faces risks with data breaches and cyber attacks, being in the United States somewhere around $10 million, kind of per major incident, that is nothing to take lightly. And seeing the trend of everything that's only going to go up. And so it really is the need to instill within the company that mindset and get ahead of this problem as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, I think that one of the other consequences that you really want to make sure of that is the reputational damage. That's something that's really important. Money can be handled through insurance. And cyber insurance is something that everybody should have. And if you don't have cyber insurance or you're unsure of your policy, you should reach out to us, because we can help you, give you consultation on obtaining cyber insurance. But cyber insurance can't really fix your reputation. You can hire a PR agent, but that note on the internet and that star next to you that says and they were breached, that's really something that can live with you for a real long time and takes time to repair.
Absolutely.
So what can a data breach attorney do to support clients?
Well, I think that one of the things for that all clients should be working their cybersecurity program through their attorney for one important reason. It's attorney-client privilege. So if you
Hmm.
should have faults in your system, if you should be missing a policy that you're supposed to have, if you haven't implemented multi-factor authentication, you want to be able to communicate that and to fix that through some, even if it's done through a third party, through your attorney, because you establish attorney-client privilege. And if a subsequent breach happens and you knew or should have known that this was a fault in your system and that you needed to fix it and you didn't fix it before there was a breach, that could, if that gets into court, then that shows additional negligence, which will increase your fines, fees, and penalties. But if we can keep we can keep that information out of court through attorney-client privilege, it can reduce your financial exposure in the event of a breach. So I think that that's really the most important thing that that an attorney can do to be able to help their clients with their cybersecurity policies and procedures that they go through.
Yeah, I think of it also from a reporting standpoint. In addition to that, like let's just say from a government or regulatory standpoint, we find out that a company has breached their responsibilities to ensure certain levels of cybersecurity protocols that requires reporting back to the government. If a voluntary self-disclosure is kind of at play here, you're also going to want your attorneys to be helping you in every step of the way there, because that's not kind of a one-time thing. That's a process that needs to play out. And if we find the issue, just like what Craig was saying, if we find the issue through the attorney-client privilege, that definitely alters the way that we can think about and ultimately respond to the issue. Of course, obviously, responding appropriately and meeting all of the requirements by the government. But I think the strategic communication becomes a paramount issue at that point in time.
Yeah,
The other thing that, yeah, go ahead.
it doesn't mean that we ultimately are the ones that are going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
We may go ahead and hire a third party IT outsource it to a third party, but the communications and the contracting and the discussions of it need to be held with privilege. And that's what's going to protect you financially and greatly reduce your risk.
Yeah, you absolutely want all of that to fall underneath the attorney-client umbrella. Hey, the other thing that I was going to mention that both you and I do, Craig, which I know we both love to do, I've kind of already mentioned training. The other one is exercises. I think that's another value, particularly that Dunlap, Bennett, and Ludwig can bring to companies in this area, is that you and I both are skilled and with a lot of experience in going into companies and organizations and conducting exercises and internal assessments and to identify those weaknesses, those gaps, those risk areas. I've been doing it for the better part of 2 decades through various organizations, both in the government. I've done the same types of exercises and risk mitigation role plays and gaming and assessments with international companies. I know you have as well, and with other international governments. So lots and lots of experience there. It's one thing to have the policy on the books, and that's great. We absolutely want to do that. But what I've seen, and I know you've seen time and time again, is that things on paper that are never exercised aren't nearly as valuable as they need to be. And oftentimes what's on paper is exactly what you do not want or do not need. And the only way you can really assess the effectiveness of your policies and plans is to play them out, is to exercise them. And so we both have a lot of experience going into companies and doing those strategic exercises to identify those gaps, which lead to greater change and training and policy development to make sure that companies are where they need to be in this area.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for that. I think we're almost at 1:00, so let's open up the floor for any questions from the audience real quick. Does anybody have a question to ask? You can either unmute or send in chat. Ayla's just shared a great blog that Aaron wrote about the benefits of having a data breach lawyer on call 24/7. If you'd like any further reading.
Thanks, Ayla. I appreciate that. And just a note, hey, while we're there, the firm has put out a lot of good blogs, a lot of good guidance and help. Craig has a lot of incredible resources in the cyber area. So contact me, and we are absolutely standing by to help however we can.
Yes, you guys are welcome to send follow-up emails if you'd like. Thank you so much for coming. Oh, Angie, thank you for the question. Could you elaborate on how Canada is a leader on security requirements?
Yeah, well, one of the things is that Canada just came out with a personal information protection and data electronic documents act. And what that did was that governed how the private sector organizes, collects, and uses and discloses personal information around commercial activities. So Canada has been kind of right beside GDPR, right beside the California Consumer Privacy Act to be able to help protect consumer information. And Canada's privacy laws and regulations within their government has risen to a level that's equal to GDPR and is recognized by Europe as something comparable. So the ability to transfer data back and forth between Canada and Europe is much easier than in the United States. But it's really because of this national approach that Canada has taken to data and consumer privacy.
Thanks, Craig. Any last questions? All right, well, thank you so much for attending our webinar today. I will send out a thank you email after the meeting with a link for everybody to rewatch the webinar if they missed part of it, or they could share that with other people. So thank you so much for coming. Make sure to email the attorneys if you have a question or would like to get in on their training exercises. So thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Kara. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.